Welcome to the Autism Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, Janeen Herskovitz, and it's my goal to help you create a more peaceful home while living with autistic and neurodivergent loved ones. Each episode, we focus on a different room in the house and help you create a peace plan for your home. So let's get started. Hey friends, welcome back to the Autism Blueprint Podcast. Today we are in the therapy room, diving deep into a topic that resonates with many of our families that are navigating complexities of autism treatment. Mainly the question of when is it time for a higher level of care or a residential placement for your child? To help us answer that today, I am thrilled to have Rebecca Wright, the Chief Operating Officer at Springbrook, joining us for this really important conversation. Rebecca brings over 13 years of experience to the field, starting as a non-clinical direct care staff member and working her way up to her current leadership role. Together, we'll explore the critical signs that indicate when it might be time for parents to consider residential treatment for their children, the importance of prior interventions, as well as how family dynamics play a crucial role in the treatment process. We'll also be discussing the innovative approaches that Springbrook employs, from sensory integration techniques to individualized treatment plans, all aimed at supporting the child and their family. So whether you're a parent seeking guidance or a professional in the field, this episode is packed with valuable insights and practical advice. So let's get started. Rebecca Wright, thank you for coming on the Autism Blueprint podcast today. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'd like to start with asking you a little bit about tell us about your position at Springbrook and how you got there. Just a little bit about your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am currently the Chief Operating Officer here at Springbrook, and I actually started about 13 years ago as a non-clinical direct care staff, fresh out of school, had my undergrad in psych, thought I knew everything. And really over almost a 7-year kind of time frame, moved from kind of an assistant position to overseeing quality, then overseeing kind of our non-clinical staff. And then 13 years later, here I am sitting in a chief operating officer seat. So I could probably take a whole podcast to talk about that journey, but it's been a fun one, a humbling one. And I'm super excited to be on the podcast today.
Awesome. What skills do you feel like you have in particular that you bring to that particular job? Because being the COO of a large residential facility like that, that's a lot.
It is, yes. I would love to say patience has been the number one skill, I think, to learn throughout this, not just with working with patients, but also working with kind of the staff members and the processes. We are a smaller company in the grand scheme of healthcare, and so there's so many wonderful things that come with that. And then there are several workarounds that we've had to figure out. So I think patience was the primary skill that's helped me be successful, but also really just being dedicated to the craft and dedicated to, patient care, patient safety, and then employee care as well, because I feel like that's maybe not quite equally as important, but pretty close when it comes down to it.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Just, as a therapist myself, it's so important. There is a top down, what would you call it? Feeling,
Yes.
when you work for a place like that, for sure. So, tell us a little bit about where you work and what they provide, what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. So Springbrook is a psychiatric residential treatment facility, which is a mouthful. So it is a place where we have patients come and stay with us. Depending on the program, will depend on the length of stay, but the patients actually come in-house and stay the full time, and then transition back to their home or other placement, just kind of depending on the discharge needs. We specialize in autism with our adolescent patients. So anywhere from assessment to full treatment. And then we do have a smaller adult acute wing where we will bring in, individuals within South Carolina to come in and receive kind of acute treatment, which is about a 7 to 14 day length of stay.
Okay. Is that the average length of stay, 7 to 14?
For our adults, yes. We have
Okay.
two adolescent groups. One is an acute stay, one is an actual residential stay. Both groups stay kind of the whole time they're here, just the length of stay is shorter. So on
Okay.
acute, that length of stay is anywhere from 30 to 45 days. And then on our actual residential program, it can be anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And then there are other factors that could extend that or shorten that, just depending on the client.
Okay. So I know that a lot of our listeners are parents of autistic children
Mhm.
and autistic adults,
Mhm.
myself being one. What are some of the common signs that a child in particular might need a residential care setting rather than outpatient or in-home support?
Ideally, the type of clients we're seeing are individuals that cannot be maintained in the home or school setting. Obviously, outpatient is a great opportunity to kind of have medication management, kind of work through maybe small behavioral outbursts here and there. But what we're seeing is a consistency of either physical aggression or some type of self harm in the home and in the school that prevents
Mm.
the individual from making any progress in the school. So, whether they're having outbursts that require, a suspension or sometimes even being expelled, even in the special education setting classrooms, typically what we're seeing are a higher level of behavior, typically with some kind of physical aggression attached to it.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I personally can relate to to that struggle as a parent for sure. At what point do parents usually realize that, hey, it might be time to explore some residential options?
Mhm. So I have seen, and I'm going to go off my experience because being here for so long, I've been able to work in a lot of the admissions and utilization management groups that kind of navigate potential admissions. So we either see one extreme or the other. We're either saying, my child had a behavior at school today. I think they need to come to you guys. And there's been no kind of outpatient intervention or any kind of medication management. So we're seeing kind of the very start of behaviors, or we're seeing the other extreme where, I'm calling the police to my house every night. We've had, 4 inpatient stays in the last 3 months, and, they stay for a week and they come home and they're just not getting better. So ideally, where we would like, I think the sweet spot from what we've seen is normally we like to have at least a couple of outpatient attempts, whether that's, 2 or 3. We don't necessarily have to have a short inpatient stay, which would be kind of that ER visit, kind of 7-day turnaround time frame. Sometimes that's more helpful for the insurance, just depending. But having prior interventions done before coming to us in the realm of behavioral and medication management, typically within the last 6 to 12 months, is what I think is that sweet spot for admission.
Okay. And do you take admissions from all over the country or just from South Carolina?
Yes, we do. So we actually are contracted with I think at least 15 to 20 states directly. But we will conduct, there's a thing in the residential world, it's called single case agreement. And so what that means is like we're agreeing with the other state, we're going to provide services and the state will cover those services. So even if we don't have a formalized contract with the state, we have the ability to reach throughout the whole United States. We have several clients we've had come from Alaska, ironically enough, which is the complete opposite of where we are. And we have serviced a client from Spain. Now, that was a very extreme situation, but we have the flexibility with our program to really partner with the majority, regardless if we have a freestanding contract or we have to go and get one.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Thanks for clearing that up. Some residential placements can be lengthy, right?
Mhm.
Especially when children have really chronic issues or unstable um, placements.
Mhm.
And then, so the goal being stabilization and long term success. How do you guys determine, in order to do that, the right duration for treatment? And what milestones are you looking for?
Right. No, that's a great question. I mean, ideally, If a client is having to go to residential treatment, it's a one and done situation, which is why they're a little bit longer than your kind of acute placements. Our average length of stay is about 6 to 9 months. I will say, depending on the location where the family resides, as well as the functioning level of the client, could extend it past 9 months. And that is typically more in the realm of making sure appropriate discharge services are set up. So if you're living out kind of in the country where there's not a lot of resources in general, we will stretch that time out to make sure appropriate services are in place within reason prior to a discharge. I think in terms of the goals that determine the length of stay. So on both units of our adolescent units, we have a meeting called treatment team. Kind of envision an IEP meeting, but you have speech, OT, the psychiatrist, nursing, the therapist, all sitting there. And there we're discussing goals that have been set. Have they been met? If they have been met, by what percentage? Are there new goals we need to bring to the table? Are there old goals that we've accomplished? And that really is the primary driver for length of stay, based off of what is being accomplished, what is not being accomplished. And we'll utilize items like, typically what we're seeing is a lot of aggression towards mom in the home. I don't know, typically it's one of those I love you, don't leave me situations, right?
Right.
So one thing we try to navigate as we're getting closer to discharge, how's the dynamic with mom? Because we would assume it would be better here because there's a level of separation. So do we need to beef up our in-person visits with mom to kind of see what behaviors are happening during and after to kind of help dictate that smoother transition home, since we know mom is the primary caregiver? So each case is individualized. We do see themes and trends, of course, I think serving as many individuals as we have over the years, but we do try to make sure what is the best setup for this client and the family that would eliminate or reduce the need for additional heavy interventions like residential or inpatient treatment in the long run.
Okay. So it sounds like you're supporting them after they get back into their home and their life and everything again. It sounds like you're helping the parents set them up for success.
Yes, that is the goal. And one thing we do also, when it's appropriate for the family and the client, we will actually have, anywhere from 2 to 4 days during treatment, and several times, hopefully towards the end of treatment, where the patient will actually go home in the home setting, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about what worked, what didn't work. Do we think we need some more education for mom or for brother, right? Is there a target in the home? And really try to do that a couple of times before they fully transition home to weed out some of those other in-home barriers that can arise that we wouldn't directly see, post-discharge.
Yeah, that makes sense. You've talked a couple of times about a target in the home, right? Coming after mom or coming after a sibling, and that's been my experience as well. Is that a common experience?
It is, and it's a common experience. It's an unpreferred topic, I think, to discuss, but it's comforting as well, because you've got these. Like I said, typically I'm seeing moms in these settings. It doesn't mean that it's not dad as well, or grandma or aunt, but you've got this scenario where you've got this primary caregiver who 9 times out of 10 has dedicated a lot of their sole purpose to treating the individual, supporting the autism, trying to get as much help as possible. And I think it's one of those things, you're closest to it. So the first person I'm going to be aggressive to is the person I'm most comfortable with, because I know they're not going to leave me. And it's, we do incorporate family therapy in our setting because it's so necessary. And 9 times out of 10, we are working through, I don't understand, I've done all of this, I've given all of this, yet I'm still the primary one that kind of gets beat up when they become upset. And it's comforting in a sense of that is consistent to what we see, but it's still a really difficult thing to navigate with the family in general and that family dynamic. So it's something we see pretty consistently across the board. There is a primary caregiver who becomes the primary target, because they're the ones always kind of working and pushing and wheeling and dealing and trying to navigate the diagnosis.
Rebecca, I can't wait to share this episode with my husband because I was the primary caregiver for so long, and we've switched roles now that my son is an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's the primary caregiver and he's getting the brunt.
Yeah, it's
everything. And I'm like, it means he trusts you.
Right.
He's like, yeah, whatever.
Right. Well, and you have to think, I mean, a neurotypical teenager in the middle of puberty, I mean, I remember how difficult I was as a 15-year-old girl. You couldn't tell me anything. And then you add a couple of layers of communication boundaries or, these hyper-focused kind of thinking that is not being communicated to you or I. So it almost adds additional layers for this aggressive behavior, whether it's verbal or physical. It's like, I'm doing everything I can. What am I doing wrong? And the answer is you're not doing anything wrong. This is just how this dynamic sometimes turns out.
Yeah. It's so difficult. I just know as a mom, I've had an experience with one of my kids having to go to treatment inpatient. And I just can't think of anything worse. It's like, it's an awful, awful feeling. And it feels like you somehow have failed. How do you help a family, or, you might even need to convince a family that this is what's best right now? How do you do that? It's such a touchy subject.
It is. And it's such a niche level of treatment. I mean, you have all of these layers with, mental health in general. And then you've got this sublayer of autism, and then this sublayer of extreme behaviors, potentially equating to going to residential treatment. I am not personally a parent. And so my first thing is to say, I do not know how you feel. I know how I think I would feel, but I cannot identify to truly all of the conflicting feelings you're having right now. What I have seen is individuals that don't get the help that they need early enough. And then what happens is you've got these, really cute, sweet kids, and the aggression just keeps building. And it's like, well, we don't want to go to residential because they're only 12 years old, right? And they'll grow out of it, and they'll grow out of it. And what happens is they grow bigger. The aggression becomes, typically what we see, the aggression becomes intensified. And now we've got this 16, 17-year-old who is unable to be maintained in the home or school. The aggression, whether it's verbal or physical, is kind of boiling over to a 9 or 10 on a daily basis. On top of, you are hitting that 17 mark, and we know at 18 services rapidly decline. So it's kind of this catch-22. I don't want to send my 8-year-old to residential treatment because I think that's too extreme. But then if I wait till 17, not that we've seen a ton of changes, especially with our older kiddos in and out, right? But it definitely has a lot of factors to it. Do they have a stable family dynamic? What is the capacity of functioning? What is the capacity of receiving and retaining information? There are all of these extra variables that are not as kind of grounded when they're a little bit younger. But you've got this catch-22 of who wants to send an 8-year-old 6 to 9 months to residential treatment. So, it is one of those things where there's this heavy guilt component, but knowing that I'm doing the right thing. Because if I don't handle this now, if I don't make this harder decision, then the resources become drastically limited once they hit 18. And yeah, you could go to some kind of acute setting. There is residential for adults, but it's drastically different than what we see kind of for adolescents. So I think it's difficult. We definitely want to comfort, give as much information as possible, give as many testimonials as possible. And sometimes the end of the conversation ends up being, listen, we think that your child needs, some level of intensive care, but we, based off the conversation, don't feel like this is the best decision for you at this time because the guilt is so overwhelming, or because, you've got behaviors that are on the line. Try a few more of this, right? Because we know this is the extreme decision. So it's not always ending as, hey, let's bring him on. It's like, I don't think you're ready. I
Okay.
don't quite know if they need this level quite yet. Here are some options, and here's what we would recommend to try before you look at this again. And those are hard conversations within itself. But, we have seen it almost detrimental, parents bringing in their children for treatment and them being so guilt ridden, it's difficult for them to be involved. And so now you've got this whole other component that you could have avoided if you would have just gotten the right direction from the beginning. So the long answer to that is I can't identify with how a parent is feeling, but I do think we have an opportunity to make a very unbiased kind of guidance for the parents to say, we think this could be successful, but we don't think this is maybe what you need to do right now. Or some tough love, we need to get them into treatment because this is only going to escalate based off of the history. So it is a catch-22, but I think giving parents informed and educated information is kind of the best thing that we can do and empower them to make the decision at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love that. I love the parent readiness is part of that. I was remembering as you were talking about the first time that I sent my son to school, to kindergarten, to a special classroom, and my husband was trying to get me to put him on the bus to take him, and he was nonverbal at the time. And I remember we were sitting with the teacher, and the teacher said, I don't think mom's ready, because I'm just sitting there bawling, right? Like, I'm like, I have no skills. I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I'm sitting there crying about the thought of letting my, little 5-year-old go on a bus. And she just looked and said, you know what? It's okay. You don't have to do that. And as a parent, having that taken off my plate to say, you have permission to not be ready yet, but eventually you will be.
Right.
Eventually you're going to get to your wit's end when this kid, beats you up for the fourth time. And this is a really tough subject because, in our house, that has happened. We've had tons of property destruction and lots of, physical aggression and things like that. And it's hard to not take that personally. Is there anything that you teach parents or say to parents when they're just taking this on so personally, like they failed in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first piece of advice that I personally like to give is you have to take care of yourself first. If you do not prioritize yourself and your mental health, you are not helpful to anyone else. And the goal that we see with a lot of our parents is to be there for their children. How can you be there for them when you're not even there for yourself? And it's easy to get wrapped up in the appointments and here's the new theories or the new diet we can try. But first things first is pause, take a breath. You're doing the best that you can, and to take the opportunity to really take care of yourself first. We're all figuring out life, right? This is the first time any of us have lived, right? So it's humans working with humans, and all we can do is have our best intentions forward and kind of give the advice to others that we would want to be given ourselves. So I do think that really making parents prioritize self-care, go see, if you don't have a therapist, we definitely provide family therapy, but we also encourage individual therapy, right? Because there is a lot of trauma that, or at least that we've seen with some of the patients we are working with who have experienced trauma, has also in a way caused trauma. And it's kind of weird. Like, I'm traumatized by my child. No one wants to talk about it, but it's true. And it doesn't equate to this child is bad. It just means they did something to me that caused trauma. And now I am responding differently, acting differently. So prioritizing the opportunity for a parent to work through their own kind of heaviness throughout the being the primary caregiver is really where we like to start. And then as they're working on themselves individually, we're working with the child individually, and then we can start to bring that together and increase communication and try to take away from, there's a lot of anger when you're being physically attacked, right? Why are you attacking me? I'm trying to take care of you. So working through the fact that sometimes they don't understand. Sometimes an individual does black out. Sometimes they do understand, right? So it's about balancing when they understand right versus wrong. And so that's been the most successful for us. Now, obviously, we don't want to, we don't provide individual therapy to parents per se, but we do try to work with individuals in their community to kind of sync them up with a good fit. Just
Right.
as, 6 to 9 months, you can get through a lot of progress on both sides if both groups are working. And then we do see, and I know we'll talk about this in a minute, but parent intervention, parent involvement, and the kind of mental state that parents are in can
Mhm.
dictate treatment pretty heavy. So we really encourage for that personalization piece, individualistic piece between patients and parents, so we can bring that together at the end.
I'm glad you just said that. That was the next thing I was going to ask you is, at least as a psychotherapist specializing in autism parents
Mhm.
for my day job, I see so often, and I've seen it in our house too, that the parent's mental health is correlated so
Mhm.
strongly with how the child is doing. And I mean, I find so many reasons for that. What do you see that correlation as well?
Yes, we do. We especially see it almost real time when we have family therapy on Zooms. So because
Mhm.
we deal with a lot of out of state families, a lot of time it's just difficult for parents to come in, once or twice a week for that family therapy component. So we'll conduct it on Zoom, and you can tell whether it's an unpreferred topic for the client, an unpreferred topic for the parent. You kind of see that real time on both sides, kind of going in, being a little bit more introverted during a session, seeing that anxiety kind of bubble up, seeing kind of the real time ticks that you wouldn't typically be able to pick up on in the home setting, within kind of talking about topics that are more difficult to navigate. So we don't intentionally push too hard in the beginning, but we do find components to really talk about those sensitive subjects in therapy so we can work through the anxiety together instead of having mom and dad and client kind of work on it outside of kind of our more structured setting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, just, I know we have therapists and caregivers and
Mhm.
all of that work with autistic children and adults, um, who I usually often talk to them about co-regulation,
Mhm.
about how to regulate so that your child can stay regulated. So that's kind of one of the tools in my toolbox. What are some of the tools in Springbrook's toolbox as far as teaching parents, what to do and not do?
Absolutely. I would say the primary one that I like the most is kind of really addressing the need for control from both sides. So you've got
Mhm.
this heavy dynamic with the child kind of role in this where they're always seeking control, right? Like, I know I'm having to be super dependent on you subconsciously, so I'm going to fight for control. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do when I'm going to do it. On the flip side of that, you've got this parental role where they know they have the control, but it turns into a power struggle pretty quickly, right? Because, like, get off the furniture. You're not supposed to stand on the furniture. You're going to get hurt if you stand on the furniture. And so, one tactic that I really learned, because it's been useful for me personally as well, is you don't have to always say you're in control or have those argumentative back and forth that's dictating control. You know, a good example is, when you work for an employer, I know who signs my checks at the end of the day. I know at the end of the day, they could dictate my behaviors to a certain extent because it is more of a conditional relationship. And I know parental child is definitely more than just conditional, but there's a conditional piece. You know, I live in mom's house, I eat mom's food, mom has to drive me places. So when it comes to those smaller to medium sized battles of get off the furniture, you know, it doesn't always have to be such a verbal back and forth for control. And so we not only teach that with parents, like, hey, it's actually okay if they're telling you no, especially if they're still doing what you asked. Don't get wrapped up in the verbal, right?
Yeah,
Focus
yeah.
on what the nonverbals are, what the behaviors are. Sometimes it's going to be a reactive, no, I'm not going to do this. And then 5 minutes later, I'm going to go do it. Right. So and that's been an important tactic, not just for our parent to child dynamic, but for our staff as well. And so I think that at the end of the day, the parent child dynamic, it's very clear what the roles are. Right. And so not to get wrapped up in those unimportant power struggles that they're going to end up doing basically what you want at the end of the day. Right. Let's not go through that kind of verbal back and forth, because that's when you start to kind of damage trust. And then it becomes kind of one of those more toxic cycles. So that's been a really helpful one for me. And I think a lot of our parents as well.
Yeah, I mean, you brought to mind that new concept, and I don't know, it can be controversial, of PDA, pathological demand avoidance, which I don't like that term necessarily. I say PDA stands for, and this isn't mine, this is from, I believe, Barry Prezant, but he says it stands for persistent drive for autonomy, which I think is such a better frame of what they're trying to do. Like, they're not trying to be disobedient. They're trying to gain some control in their world that feels so out of control all the time, with everything bombarding them. And some of them have such difficulty speaking and eating and going to the bathroom. I mean, it just encompasses every aspect of their lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have parents that ask? I've had parents call my office and say, "Do you guys deal with PDA?" And I'm like, "Well, yes." Because, I mean, yeah, but is that what we're calling it now? Like, so how do you handle parents coming at you guys with the latest social media trends of neurodiversity and autism?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I love the overall awareness that social media has brought to not only mental health, but autism in general. With the way that we implement our clinical interventions, we really focus on evidence-based research. So not that we don't start exploring kind of new things that are coming to the table, but we do want a period of time before we fully implement them. So we have opportunities to soft introduce certain methodologies, within a structured setting with like our unit groups with our clinical therapists or our occupational therapists or speech therapists. So we have opportunities to test things out. But in terms of fully kind of having a program intervention, we would want something to be on the market for several years with some heavy evidence-based research, not only to see what works, but to see, okay, it could be successful in a short burst setting, but what is the long-term effect, whether that's positive or negative. So I'm always open to, especially now, all of the new things that are coming in terms of awareness with what's it called, moral injury with individuals in the Army setting. Those things are wonderful. I think we would like to see a lot more research behind some of those methods. So when we do a full implementation, because we are so individually focused on each client's individual progress, we can have a lot more flexibility in implementation. And when items first come out, you're kind of stuck in this like one pathway of, this is kind of the therapy that you do, and this is how long you do it for, and this is how long it should take to see results. So having more time gives us more flexibility to really make it more individualized to the person.
I love that. Thank you for explaining that. There is widespread concerns about the residential care industry. Reports of poor oversight, insufficient regulation, things like that. So in what ways does Springbrook distinguish itself? Adherence to accreditation, staff training, things like that. How do you guys handle all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a very niche setting, and you've got humans working with humans, and the population you're serving, at least 70 to 80% are dealing with high aggression behaviors. Another thing I think about psych in general is typically people are gravitated to psych for a reason, whether that is someone personal in their life, whether it is them individually. So I think one thing we really try to focus on is to minimize as much transference as possible. I think that you have to have a passion for psych, but there is good and bad passion at the end of the day. So making sure it's the appropriate balance of passion and engagement, because we are serving individuals with very high needs. So a couple of things that we've done. I mean, first and foremost, we like to have as much of a, kind of transparent dynamic as possible within kind of the regulatory bounds that we're under. So we are Joint Commission accredited. We obviously are overseen by the state. We partner with several advocacy groups that we will staff things off of. Or if we have concerns about something, we can staff it their way. Because we navigate with multiple states, we are overseen by all of those state regs as well. So it's not just we're under South Carolina and Joint Commission. Every state we partner with, there is a level of regulations we have to abide by. And all of that is important. All of that is good. At the end of the day, how do we keep patients safe? And the number one answer to that is just being very transparent. We have cameras throughout our building, right? Which is obviously a pretty easy thing to have in residential. But we've really prioritized staffing over the last couple of years with some pretty big sprints to not only having numbers, but are they the right numbers? I mean, you can fill a unit with staff, but are they patient? Are they, what's the education background? We put them through several weeks of orientation as well as kind of annual training, monthly training, things like that. But we also have the luxury, because if we are so niche, we function at higher staffing numbers than most residential placements. At least, we're privately owned, but we are functioning, more of that, 1-to-2, 1-to-3 ratio from staff to patient. A lot of residential placements don't have that luxury. And we've been very blessed and have worked very hard to not only adhere to those numbers, but exceed those numbers on the units. So, to sum it all up, you have to have leadership invested. You have to have leadership invested in getting the right staff in, and to developing those staff members and being able to navigate those staff members of, is this the right fit? And if it is the right fit, what do we need to build on this month from a skill perspective? So it is difficult. I mean, it's a difficult climate in general, but it's not impossible. And a lot of things are defined, not what you do right, but how you respond and change to things that maybe don't always go right. And we're a big believer of that as well, of we can learn from anything. And we want to make sure that we are continue to stay invested in not only patient safety, staff safety, but overall the efficiency of the program within itself.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm wondering too, you guys are combining therapies and education as well. Are you providing schooling while they're in there?
Yes, we do. So we try to, we mimic IEPs within our setting, and it's called an ISP. It's basically the same thing, just a different acronym. So what we're doing is we are working in clinical groups throughout the education timeframe. So we try to function with, kind of 45-minute max groups or education time at a time, because we start to lose them, right? We start to lose the focus. We start to have behaviors. So to work in little breaks throughout the day. And what that has caused us to do is, if we, need to do speech group, and then we're going to do math, and then we're going to do something fun with recreational therapy, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do social studies. We have the ability to kind of break that up throughout the day. So what we do is we have partnered with, it's online and in-person school system, just depending on the student's needs. Because ironically enough, now we're seeing individuals having a tougher time doing physical schoolwork versus on the computer. And so that program actually has a track where they get school credit hours that can transfer back to their school, and they can work towards a diploma, or we can start hitting college credits, right? Depending on where the functioning is. So not only do we have the flexibility to break it up to where it's best for the learners, but it still will keep them on track when they transition back to the school setting, and they're not losing any knowledge along the way.
I love that. Let's talk about sensory support, sensory issues and sensory support. So you mentioned you have OTs and PTs on staff as well. Um, how do you see their sensory system relating to their mental health? How important is that?
It is very, very important. One thing that we see a lot is, when we're starting to feel upset, where do we feel it within our body? And sometimes that's hard for the client to communicate, but it's like point to where you feel it. Is it your chest? Is it your stomach? Is it your head? Is it your neck? What are you feeling right now? And one thing that I've always, at least in my experience, have seen here is that sensory integration, specifically around the core, with individuals on the autism spectrum is just so important because you've got your natural walking gait in general, but you've also got the opportunity where when clients are starting to feel pretty upset, they feel it in their stomach first, right? And then it starts to spread throughout. So really targeting that sensory integration with a weighted vest, a compression vest. We have kind of swivel seats that'll move you around and it'll force you to create balance and force you to strengthen that core. It's very interesting how much easier it is for them to develop coping skills while we're working in that sensory integration. And then, of course, lighting. We do really target the blues and the greens and the calming colors, music, aromatherapy, all that plays a piece, but giving them tools that they can use on themselves without needing any other kind of device to support them, kind of really helps during some of those potential meltdown moments.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. You guys sound like you're on it with the sensory stuff. That's wonderful. I'm wondering about the non-speaking community, the non-speaking patients. Do you have specific guidelines around how you treat? I'm also thinking about the presumption of competence,
Mm-hmm.
in those individuals, as well as their way to communicate. So some of them might use PECs, or some might use
Mm-hmm.
um, a an iPad or whatever that is. What's your experience with the non-speakers?
Yeah, absolutely. So with those programs, the actual time within doing like a group, whether that's therapy or an education group, is actually taken from 45 minutes to about 30 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes to 15. Sometimes we'll have individuals that we have to start 5 minutes, right? Because that's that kind of the capacity level. One thing we do for those units, just because you've got the nonverbal component, is the staffing levels are higher on that unit in general. But we use PECs a lot. Unfortunately, with some of our kiddos down there, we have used iPads before, but what we're seeing is iPads have been sometimes overutilized with the clients, that bringing one on the unit actually causes a lot of chaos
Yeah.
versus
Yeah.
not. So we do lean more towards that physical PEC system. We've actually painted a PECs kind of system on the wall where they can point, like if I'm thirsty, we're going to point to drink. And so if they're not carrying something around, then there's something accessible for them on the walls as well. Another thing we do with our kind of not more nonverbal population is we actually program them right beside our nurses station. So not only do you have the clinical staff with line of sight, but you also have your nurses. One thing we've seen is just a higher level of medical comorbidities with that population. Yeah. So we increase the oversight just in general. Chop up the day a little bit smaller into more palatable timeframes for them. And then we work in a lot more of the transition breaks for them, and then physical activity. And physical activity isn't we're going to go to the gym, but sometimes it is we're going to go to the gym. One thing we really try to do for that population is get them in typical societal settings, like a cafeteria, a gymnasium. We have an indoor pool, and start to work with them on navigating kind of the sensory overload that could happen in more of those common areas. It takes a little bit longer, but it's helpful when you can go from we have to eat in every night to we can go to a buffet tonight, even if it's a 45-minute max, with my child now. And I wasn't able to kind of do that before. It starts to bring in some of that quote unquote normalcy into the quality of life. And so that's kind of more of our target for that population, is not just enhanced communication, but to really bring a better quality of life when it comes to engaging in kind of those normal activities that other, verbal clients can participate in.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, because I feel like with my son, at least, he wants so badly to be able to do those things. And I can see how disappointed he is when he can't. He wants to be able to tolerate, being in a restaurant and things like that. But you really do have to kind of scaffold that for them in order for them to be able to do it. So I love that is on your radar. That's wonderful. Food and nutrition is the last topic I wanted to cover. What do they eat while they're there?
Yes. So I love our dietary staff, especially seeing kind of a 13-year progression from when I first started to now. They have just done such a wonderful job at not only incorporating things to support kind of that sensory dynamic, but we talked about control earlier. The cafeteria was historically a pretty consistent site for behaviors. And I will say it took us a little bit of time to figure out what is going on in the cafeteria. Well, we have a line where, we'll have several options, and then the client can choose, what they want and what they don't want. One thing we didn't have was an alternatives list. And so kids in general can be picky eaters. We deal with that additional heavy sensory component with kind of food aversion here as well. So several years ago, our dietary manager came up with this option to have an alternatives list. So it has your grilled cheese, it has your chicken fingers, it has your fries, and all of that is overseen by a dietitian just to make sure we're getting in the appropriate nutrients. Are we, where's our A1C, all of that stuff. But having that alternative brought a level of choice to the client's day that they did not have before. Now, some clients, depending on where they're at, we might ask, take a bite of this shepherd's pie, right? That's a very multi-textural thing. Take a bite, and then we can do the alternatives menu. So not only did it start to become a choice, but it was used as a tool to kind of test and expand the sensory palette when it came to food. So now we're hitting all of these wonderful kind of historical barriers with the clients, that allowing more choices throughout the day. We got to a point to where people were getting upset if they weren't on kind of our picky eaters list, because picky eaters would kind of have a special program of, you would get chicken fingers and fries, but you're working, hand in hand with the dietitian or someone off the dietary staff to kind of expand the palette on an individual basis. But it really reduced behaviors in our cafeteria, because that was kind of a collective social setting where we would have 1 to 2 units at a time go and eat. So you've got the noise, you've got the smells, you've got all of these things. And now we have a choice that we didn't have before. And so it has been, when I say it out loud, I'm like, well, duh, like that's such an easy thing to think of. But we hadn't thought of it. And it really took bringing in someone from the outside who had healthcare experience, but not direct psych experience, to say, let's just give them a choice. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is such a wonderful idea. And so it's kind of like, it's kind of a first then, or this or that, do you want this or do you want that? So now we're kind of bringing in this soft, I know it's a little controversial, but soft ABA approach to things of, making sure we have options. So it's been such a wonderful thing. And it's something we actually recommend in the home now, to give choices when you can give, smaller choices that aren't going to negatively impact the day, depending on what's chosen, to kind of rebuild the trust between the caregiver and the individual. So it's just been, so I can't speak enough about it, because it's probably one of the best things I've been able to at least have my hand in the last couple of years. That's been such a drastic improvement in behaviors overall. And such a simple thing that we wouldn't have even thought of. So,
you know what? And Rebecca, it's so funny you say that. As a trauma therapist, I've learned, and this was a light bulb moment for me in a training one time, they said, make sure that your traumatized clients know their choices at all times, that there's always a choice. Even when it feels like there isn't a choice, point out the choices. And I took that home to my son because, you mentioned before about parents being traumatized. Most individuals on the autism spectrum that I see all have PTSD
Right.
from being autistic. So those choices, and their system is just always in fight or flight, right? So the choices give them some control, some perceived control,
Right.
at least, which is great. I mean, I think parents, if you're going to take anything away today, see if you can give your child a choice of two. Whether it's, my son doesn't like to wear clothes, so I grab a pair of pants and a pair of shorts that I know he can wear, and I say choose one, and I leave them with him, and I say I'm going to go, do whatever I'm going to do. When I come back, we'll talk about which one you want to wear, and eventually he just puts one on because he knows he's not going to be allowed to come in the kitchen without pants on.
Right.
It's my rule.
Yes.
Got to have them. But yes, I love that. I love that. Oh, Rebecca, this has been such a pleasure talking to you about this stuff. I feel like we're very much aligned in our thought processes. What advice would you give to parents who are struggling with this decision over whether residential care is needed?
Right. I would say, at the end of the day, you're not deciding on what's going to happen today. You're deciding on the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest kind of struggles we see with parents is not just, when I have to make this decision for them to go into treatment, but the bigger fear is what's going to happen to them when I'm either unable to care for them or no longer here to care for them.
Yeah.
And going into an intensive level of residential treatment, you can't replicate that in the home. That's why there's so few places out there. It's 24/7 care with multiple individuals. I mean, it would be almost impossible to replicate it. And so it doesn't mean everything's going to be solved. But what we're looking to do is to get the behaviors manageable and to have appropriate coping skills and interventions in place when things do go awry. And so that, at least what we have seen, has been able to set up success for a lot of our patients who, parents did not know, they're going to be living with me, until I'm no longer around. We've had several kids that I know of directly that have gone from, I won't even clean my room without punching a hole in the wall, to now I have my own apartment and a job and a girlfriend, and I'm going on my first vacation. I know not every story is so, rainbows and butterflies, but I will say making that hard decision now, a lot of the times is helpful in the long run, because there are skills that are going to be learned. There is movement that's going to be gained. And whether it's a stepping stone or a direct start to finish path to, being able to function better in society, it's a hard decision, but typically what we see, it's a necessary decision to help with not just now, but 10, 15, 20 years from now. I can sleep better at night because I made a hard decision for these 6 months to not be around my child, but now they're doing their ADLs independently, or they're able to fully use a PEC system, or they'll clean their room. Being a 16-year-old boy, they'll clean their room and they'll take a shower and they'll brush their teeth, right? Which is difficult to do anyway. So, I definitely think at the end of the day, even though it's difficult, parent has to be at least accepting of this is what they need, but really not looking at what's the next 6 months look like, what does the next 60 years look like. And that's what our goal is to build foundational skills for the rest of their life.
I love that. And Rebecca, I'm going to put you on the spot. I ask all of my guests this final question. If every autism parent in the world were listening, what would you want them to know?
The days are never perfect, but they're doing the right thing. I think it's difficult. I can't imagine how difficult it would be to not only be a parent, but to be a parent of an individual that needs additional kind of TLC, like some of our autism kiddos. But no day is going to be perfect, and that's okay, but that doesn't equate to it's been a bad day. You know, they're kids at the end of the day, even though they see the world a little bit differently. And it just goes back to you're a human being working with a human being, and we're all trying to figure it out, and that's okay. That doesn't have to be, you don't have to be perfect for it to be successful.
I love that. On that note, Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on, and I'll link to everything in the show notes, links to Springbrook Behavioral Health. If you guys want to check it out, they have a beautiful website, very informative, and a great frequently asked questions section. So definitely check that out. And, you know, guys, give them a call if you have any questions at all, and they'll answer them for you. Thanks for coming on, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that wraps up another episode of the Autism Blueprint podcast. A huge thank you to Rebecca Wright for sharing her insights and experiences with us today. Here are a few takeaways to keep in mind. One is recognizing the signs of when your child might need a higher level of care. So if your child's exhibiting unmanageable behaviors at home or school, it could be time to explore some options for treatment. So remember, it's all about finding the right kind of support for your family. The next thing is to prioritize self-care. So as parents, it's essential to take care of ourselves first because we can't pour from an empty cup. You guys hear me say that all the time. So make sure to carve out some time for your own mental health and well-being. The next is communication is key. So open dialogue with your child and their treatment team can make a world of difference. So don't hesitate to ask all the questions and seek clarity about what is best for your child. Choices matter. So simple changes like offering different food choices to your child significantly can reduce the stress and improve behavior, particularly during meal times. I really liked that part of the conversation we were talking about autonomy and choices mattering a great deal to our kids. And the last one is celebrating progress. So every step forward that your child is making and you are making, no matter how small, is worth celebrating. So whether it's a successful therapy session or learning a new coping skill, take a moment to acknowledge those wins in both your child and yourself. So thanks so much for joining us today. We hope that you found this conversation as uplifting and informative as we did. We were discussing a tough topic there, guys. And so if you have any questions at all, please feel free to contact us. The links are in the show notes, as well as subscribe and share with your friends if you enjoyed this episode. So if you would like more support and more freebies and fun stuff and Q&As and then stuff for our paid subscribers, check all of that out on our Patreon Discord community at patreon.com/autism blueprint. So there you can sign up to be our neighbor or a house guest. There's different tiers of support, and your support helps keep our porch light on. So a huge thank you to all of our current patrons. If you're not ready to become a patron, be sure to sign up for free there, because then you can receive updates on all of the upcoming events and episodes and opportunities to connect. Thanks so much for tuning in, and take good care.
The information in this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional.